What are you afraid of? I think that's a question we all need to ask ourselves from time to time, because fear lurks under many of our decisions, our conversations, our actions. It can be there in an argument with a spouse about whether or not to take a summer vacation this year. An argument which on the surface might be about how much the vacation is going to cost, but is really about fear. Fear that we might need that money for something else later, or maybe fear that problems will arise while we're away. Fear might underlie a heated discussion between a teenager and a parent about how late they can be out with the car. The teenager's fear of missing out, of being left behind by friends who definitely will be out late, and the parent's fear about all the things that could potentially harm their beloved child while he or she is out there in the night. Sometimes we aren't even aware that we're making fear-based decisions. We might tell ourselves we're being prudent or frugal or trying to get closure or taking the safe course. But all the while underlying that prudence is fear of what might be. Our fears aren't necessarily rational. That hypothetical vacation may be vitally important to our physical and mental well-being, and we might well have all the money we need to pay for it, and yet still have a lurking fear that we would be wasting money we might need later for something more important. And in truth, storms, metaphorical and otherwise, can come up unexpectedly in our life. In 2019, how many of us were expecting what the next 2 years would bring? But even in normal times, all it takes is a troubling finding on your annual physical, a difficult job evaluation, a downturn in the economy, turmoil in an important relationship, and suddenly there's a storm cloud looming on the horizon. So we can all sympathize with the fearful disciples in today's gospel story because we all know fear. Now, of course, fear has its place. If you are standing in a crosswalk with tons of bus barreling towards you at high speed, fear just might save your life. But when we're not in physical danger, fear can make it hard to make good decisions. Fear can paralyze us, making trust and the confident action that trust makes possible difficult, if not impossible. I know that's true for me. If I'm fearful that I'm about to be verbally or emotionally attacked, I seize up. As soon as I fear that I'm about to be hurt, my instinct is either to start to shut down or to prepare a counterattack, even when I know intellectually that that is exactly the wrong thing to do. My fear of being hurt can overcome my best self. But the good news is that God is with us, even when we are frozen in fear, even when we launch into attack, even when we run away or try to avoid recognizing the harm our actions are doing. God is with us, even when we don't respond with our best selves. In today's gospel reading, the disciples are understandably afraid. They're in a huge, dangerous storm in a relatively small boat. And they allow their fear to overwhelm them. So they don't come to Jesus and say, "Teacher, we need your help." But rather, "Teacher, don't you care that we're dying?" This is not a trusting or faithful request. This is a fear-induced accusation. But despite their lack of faith, Jesus still calms the sea. He still looks out for them. You don't have to have perfect faith for God to respond. Indeed, you can even be paralyzed by fear. Assume the worst about God, and God's mercy and grace are still with you. Even within the church, fear can threaten to sink us if we start to focus too much on worry and fear. Worry about the deficit, or fear that our need to grow might mean we no longer know those who sit with us in the pew, or fear that change of any sort will mean losing what we personally love about our church. And it's easy to understand why that is. There's so much about life that's ambiguous, that's in flux. So it's reassuring to hold on to those tangible, external aspects of faith, like which songs we sing, or what we do in worship, or what type of people we expect to join the parish. But fear is not what enabled the first churches to thrive and grow and spread around the world. And it won't enable any church today to thrive either. Fear is what keeps churches from thriving. Faith, trust in God and not just in our own opinions, is what enables us to grow and thrive. We have another example of the contrast between fear and faith in the story of David and Goliath. As long as the army of Israel believed Goliath's boasts about his prowess, they remained immobilized, paralyzed by fear, which is, of course, exactly what he was trying to do to them. But when young David hears the Philistines' mockery, he volunteers, despite the fact that he's, quite frankly, a pretty unlikely challenger for the Philistine champion. But David is not relying on his own strength or his non-existent military prowess. He's not even saying, well, I'm really good with a slingshot, so I bet I could take him out. Rather, he's confident that the living God, who has delivered him from danger before, will deliver him from Goliath. And so Goliath comes with his impressive size and his armor and his boastfulness, and David meets him with 5 smooth stones in the name of the Lord of hosts. In truth, David was armed with trust in God, in whose grace and love he had lived his whole life. When it comes to our faith and how we live it out, I think we all have the choice of whether we will allow fear or trust in God to call the shots. Unfortunately, a whole lot of us look at the storm waves crashing around us and act as if we think Jesus is asleep someplace there in the back of the boat. I think when that happens, Jesus asks us what he asked those disciples in the boat. Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? It takes faith to stay the course when things are unsettled. And despite the very real problems we do all face, still follow God to new life. It was faith that enabled Abraham and Sarah to leave the land of their ancestors and travel to a place they didn't even know. It was faith that enabled the children of Israel to leave slavery in Egypt and set out for the promised land. It was faith that enabled the first Christians, the first followers of Jesus, to preach the gospel throughout the Mediterranean world as they were scattered by oppression and hardship. Yes, all these and more did the hard work to make it happen. They didn't sit back and say, okay, God, do your thing. But they did rely on their faith and their trust in God to determine their direction and to support them through all the trials that did come. Frederick Buechner writes, Christ sleeps in the deepest selves of all of us, and whatever we do in whatever time we have left, wherever we go, may we, in whatever way we can, call on him, as the fishermen did in their boat, to come awake within us and to give us courage, to give us hope, to show us each one our way. May he be with us, especially when the winds go mad and the waves run wild, as they will for all of us before we're done, so that even in their midst we may find peace. We may find Christ. That's my prayer for each one of us. I pray that the presence of Christ will be so alive and awake in your spirit that truth will not only be spoken, but heard and carried out into the world, so that we will move forward in love with God as our guide and support. Amen.